Hello, my name is Ronnie Stevens, and this is from the Life-Giving Fire. Today we're making meat pies with hot water pastry. We'll start with the pastry. To start, we're going to need 500 grams of all-purpose flour, a teaspoon of salt, and we'll put that into the flour. Next, we're going to need 200 milliliters of water, 1 stick or 120 grams of unsalted butter, and 70 grams of lard. The water and the oils are going to go into a saucepan and be put on the stove, bringing them up to temperature, boiling the water and melting the oils. Meanwhile, we put our flour into our bowl, and we're going to give that a little bit of a stir just to make sure that the salt is well distributed. Now on the stove I already have some water and oil and butter waiting, and you see that's still real close to boiling. That's where we want it. That's what's going to make our pastry hold together. What you're doing is you're blooming the starch molecules in the flour. We're going to put all of this in, and it's rather like making gravy, but the heat and the oil and the water are allowing the starch molecules to explode. And as they do, they grab and hold more water, and they grab and hold onto that oil at the same time. And as you stir it, you see as it comes together here, we're starting to get very crumbly, pretty thick. We're going to have to switch to hands here in a second. But you see how that is pulling together. There's not a lot of dry, but we don't want any dry. So now we're going to go in with our hands. This is going to be warm, and it should still be warm. So you see how quickly you're moving in and out. You start to work it together, and as it comes together, turn it over and knead it to make sure that all of the dries are incorporated into the water and the oil so that you don't have any dry pieces left in your dough. Just knead through it a few times, and it's still very warm at this point too. You don't want to let it cool off while you're working it. But I don't see any more dry in this ball of dough. It looks like we've gotten it all. We've kneaded it several times, and it's ready to set aside and allow to cool. And we do want to put some plastic over that because we don't want to lose our moisture while it's cooling. Pull your ball together, make it relatively even across the top and fairly rounded so that it'll cool and come together at about the same time and all at one piece. Now this pastry will keep in your fridge for days, in your freezer for months, and I always try to keep some in the refrigerator. So we're ready to start our meat pies. This is some pastry that was in the refrigerator earlier. It's still a little bit cool, so I'm going to work it through my hands and warm it up and make it more pliable so that we can use it for our pie. Just take it and tear off a chunk, work it between your hands, let it take up the heat and the moisture from your hands, and it starts to feel really soft, and you can feel the oils in it and the gelatin in it. It feels like Play-Doh, and it's actually kind of the origins of Play-Doh. Next, we're going to press out some of this dough to make our casings for our meat pie. I like to use a tortilla press. It saves a lot of rolling time. Although the tortilla press has a few drawbacks of its own, overall it's still a really good way to do this. Now we're going to tear off a chunk of dough, about what we need for one of our casings, and we're going to line the tortilla press with some plastic wrap. And this is actually a plastic bag. We're going to put one sheet on the bottom. Now this is how they do it in the restaurants and in groceries where they still hand make the tortillas. You're going to have a piece of plastic on there, then the tortilla dough, and then another piece of plastic. This makes it much easier to pull the tortilla off once it's been pressed. And you see, this is just a zipper bag, and I've cut the zipper off and opened the seams all the way around so that we have all four sides open and two completely free sheets. And I use freezer bags because they're a lot tougher and they can stand up to the pressure that we're giving them. Now, do you see the wrinkles developing in here? That's the tension in the dough where the gluten's pulling back, and when you pull one piece off, that dough is just going to curl over on top of itself. That's okay, but what it means is we want to take it off both pieces of plastic and let it relax before we go back in. You see it shrinking up in my hand. Put it back on the plastic, put the other on top, and press it again. And we'll do that several more times, peeling off the plastic, letting it relax, and then right back in. Now we have both pieces of our dough together. They've both been pressed out on the tortilla press, and it's time to start working them with our hands. This is going to be our lid. It's slightly smaller than the other piece, and we're going to go into the center of it, not around the edges, but in the center, and thin it from the center out. We're not really too worried about the edges. You see how thick the bottom is, though? That's between a little over 1/8 of an inch thick. Now, if you put that on the bottom of your pie that thick, it's going to be nearly 1/4 of an inch thick by the time it bakes up. So we're going to come in here and flatten out the center a little bit. We've got that about where we want it, and now we're ready to put our pie together. You can use a food ring, but I just use a can that's had both ends cut off, the size that I want, and run through the dishwasher. Now what we're making here is just a simple beef pie with a little Worcestershire for flavor. It's just ground beef, and I have with that some smoked salt, just to bring a little bit more smoky flavor to it. I like to keep the smoked salt around. I use it on all sorts of things, especially if it's something that hasn't had a trip to the smoker. So we're going to take our beef and just crumble it up into our can. Just let it fall to little pieces. You don't want to put the whole mass in at once and have it compressed. The idea is to make your meat a little bit looser just by pulling it apart before you drop it in. Now you're going to use about 1/6 to 1/4 of a pound, depending on, think about the size hamburger you want. And that's about how much beef you want to put in here for a meal. Or if you want to use some other combination of meats or a different kind of meat, that's wonderful too. We're going to put a little bit of our Worcestershire, oh, you know what it is. We're going to put some of that in there for flavor. And then we'll tamp it down just a little bit, especially around the edges. Again, we're trying to keep this meat a little bit loose, but around the edges we need it to be a little bit less loose so that it can all hold together. Using a spoon, you can go around the inside of your can and just tamp down at the sides. Then once we've done that, we're just going to pull the can straight up and off, and our meat is going to hold its shape, mostly because of what we did around the edges just with that spoon and our fingertips. Now here's our other piece of dough, and it's still pretty thick. So we're going to work from the inside again. We're not going to do much at all with the outsides because those are going to form the sides of our pie, and that elasticity in the dough is actually going to work for us on this one. But we do want to smush out the middle, make it nice and thin so that we don't have that giant piece of dough on the bottom. We're looking for a crust and not a bun. So we want this to be bigger around than our lid and have enough left so that it can also form the sides. Once we get it pushed out where we want it to be, we're just going to pick it up and put it on top, peel it off the parchment, put it on top of the dough. Now make sure that it's centered pretty well. Start at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock, stretching the dough just a little bit over that mound of meat. Seal 12 and 6, then go around to 9 and 3. Seal both of those, keeping your dough fairly evenly distributed, and then in between those seals, put another seal all the way around. And now you have 8 places that you've already sealed down, and just cup your hands around the entire mound of meat and press down with the edges of your hands. Now this looks like a really big ravioli. And that's kind of what it is, but with obviously a different kind of dough. Go around with your fingertips and make sure that that seal is even all the way around. And then we're going to trim off the excess once we get that. Just use your finger and the width of your finger to measure how much trimming you really want to do. But you want to make sure that you leave some on here to finish your seal once we flip it over, because we're about to do that, and fold in your edges. So you need to leave a little bit sticking out here on the sides. Get the last of that trimmed off, and don't throw this away. All of it can go right back into your bag in the refrigerator and be part of tomorrow's pie. So we're set. We're going to flip upside down. There we go. Now just pat it out a little bit, run it around and around between your hands just to let the bottom of the pie flatten out and the top mound up. We're going to help that a little bit by easing around our dough some. And as we go through and reinforce our seal around what is now the top, we're going to use our fingertips to create just a little moat around the inside of that seal. That's going to help us keep our seal solid. Do a little patchwork here. And it's also going to help us, if there are any juices that escape through the seal, they'll go right back on top of our pie and into our moat. But most importantly, when this is done, that moat is going to hang on to some sauce for us. We're going to get there in just a minute. So we have most of the seal already done. We've got some little flanges here, and you can either just trim this off or go around and flute it. Be really decorative if you like, but flute it any way you want, the way you would any pie. Now that we've got all of our trimming done, we're going to fold inward around the top edges of the pie and seal that as you fold as well. And you're building your moat, and you're making sure that your two pieces of dough are sealed and nicely become one. Of course, the idea here is to completely encase the meat so that it all cooks together. Everything folded down. Try and make this as even as possible as you do. And then once you have that done, you're going to go back around the pie and pinch the sides. That's going to pull more tension into the bottom part of your dough, and at the same time, that little extra dough in the pinch is going to give you some side support on your meat and help the pie hold itself up while the pastry is setting. Now, we've sealed everything up, but we're going to have a lot of steam, so we have to find a way for that to escape. We're going to grab a skewer and go straight down in the middle. Don't go through the bottom. Rotate it around a little bit to open up that top steam hole, and that's where your steam's going to escape. Now, after I do that, I like to go in sideways into my meat, poking into the meat but not out through the pastry. This creates some side channels that not only loosens up your meat so it's not packed, but also gives some of those juices that are going to convert to steam a way to get out through the channels we just made, move through the pie, and up through the steam hole. Next, we're going to egg wash, and this is what I call a heavy wash. All you need to do is put a single egg in the jar, in a canning jar, and then use the eggshell to measure a half an eggshell's worth of cream or milk. If you prefer, you can use water. That's a standard egg wash for me. If I'm using cream or milk, that's what I consider to be a heavy egg wash. I much prefer to use a bristle brush when I'm doing any kind of pastry. A bristle brush is a lot more gentle to the pastry, less likely to tear it. It distributes the wash much more evenly than a silicone brush is going to do. You want to make sure you get down in, and all those little nooks and crannies. Again, a bristle brush is going to get down into those far better than a silicone brush will. Nothing against silicone, this is just not the application for it. All the way around on the sides. Now, your egg wash is another one that'll keep for a few days. I don't like to keep it more than maybe 2 or 3 days, but I hate making it up, using it just a little bit and then throwing it out. and it certainly will keep for 2 to 3 days in your refrigerator, especially if you put the lid on it. We're going to wash the bottom because we want that to be nice and crunchy too. And we're not going to cook this flat on the pan, so the heat will be able to get to the bottom and cook that through for us. That's going to give us a beautiful shine when it comes out of the oven. Now we're just about ready to finish up. We're going to take some of this parchment paper that we've used to roll everything out, and we're going to make a little moat platform for our pie. When we bake this, we're going to put it on a cooling rack up above the baking sheet. And we're going to use the parchment paper here to hold the juices in place to keep them from spreading all over the oven and the baking sheet and everything else. Just take this about 8 to 10 inches square and then fold up the sides inwards so that when they open up a little bit, they open up with their openings to the inside, and any juices that get out are trapped inside those folds. Transfer your pie over, make sure it fits nicely. Now we're going to do something a little different. Take it out, and because we want that bottom crust nice and crispy, now we have to poke holes in it. It seems counterintuitive, but it's really not. Any of the juices that are on the bottom are going to make your crust soggy, so we want to let those escape. We're going to punch some holes through this piece of parchment, and when we put it on the cooling rack elevated above the baking sheet, there'll actually be another square of parchment under that that'll catch the juices that fall through these little holes. But that allows us to get a much better cook on the bottom of the pie. So we're ready to go in the oven. Just transfer your pie onto this, put it on your baking sheet, and you want to turn your oven to 400 degrees. We're going to cook this really hot. But this is ready to go in, set the oven, and as soon as it comes up, we'll go into the heat. Now, as it happens, while we're waiting for the oven to come to temperature, we have time to put together very quickly a cherry pie. We're going to do that in a souffle dish rather than freestanding because there's going to be a lot more juice in this. We don't want to lose any more than we have to, and it's not going to hold up well. The pastry is just not going to stand up to it. Now we're going to start with what I call dirty sugar. This is just sugar with the vanilla seed pods in the sugar. I found out a long time ago, almost every recipe that calls for vanilla also calls for sugar. And if you're using a pod, when you scrape out the vanilla seeds, they get everywhere, all over your knife, all over your plate, all over your hands. And it's such a waste to throw that away. So I was picking up the sugar after I had handled vanilla pods, and I noticed that the sugar just pulled those vanilla seeds right off my fingers. So now I do that intentionally, and I always keep a little jar of dirty sugar sitting on my counter. Sprinkle a little in the bottom because that's going to caramelize under our pastry and help caramelize the bottom of your crust when you put it in. Now we have our bottom crust ready to go into the souffle dish. We're not going to do the press out in the center with this because this time the elasticity in the dough is going to work for us. The bottom of this dough is not going to go all the way to the souffle dish yet. Work it in. You see where it's kind of like a drum head or a trampoline down in there. Put the edges of your crust right up with the edge of the souffle dish, maybe even peeking over a little bit if you like. But press it in, push it down as much as you can without pushing through the crust. Seal it up around the side so it doesn't fall down when you put your fruit in. Just gently, gently ease down on it a little bit, give it a little more stretch, and make sure that you've got everything holding tight up at the sides. A little more dirty sugar in here, and if you want a thicker syrup, you can put about a teaspoon of corn syrup in there, and that's going to make your cherry syrup really thick and rich. Now I have half frozen sweet cherries and half dried tart cherries, and they're going to go in together. When the sweet cherries bake, they're going to give up a lot of juice. In most cases, if that's all you use is the frozen berries, you're going to end up with a whole lot of syrup in your pie and then a whole lot of empty inside your crust. I like to use dried cherries in with my frozen cherries, and those dried cherries will absorb a lot of that moisture, and it gives you a lot more fruit inside your pie. Fill it up all the way to the edge of the souffle dish, maybe even a little bit over. Use your tortilla press to press out your lid, and then put that on the top, tucking your top lid inside the crust inside your souffle dish, and then pressing against the side of the dish, making a little bit of a moat as you go around here too, and sealing up as much as you can. It's not going to be quite as easy to seal this because the fruit juices are working against you on that, but seal it as best you can because you want to trap as much of that juice as possible. Working all the way around, pleating as you need to, but making sure that you keep that crust on top and over your cherries. There we go, all sealed up. And we're going to hit that with, again, our heavy egg wash. We didn't have to put any vanilla in this recipe because it was already in our sugar. That's part of the wonderful thing about having the dirty sugars. You don't have to measure out your vanilla. You can just toss it in with whatever you're cooking and half your recipe's done. Brush that thickly over the top. Be really generous with your egg wash on here. And once you've done that, we're going to put some sugar. We're going to open our steam hole. Don't worry if you catch a cherry. I did when I was doing this. There's a cherry stuck on my skewer. Try and turn the skewer around and see if we can pull it out, but the cherry still comes out anyway. So what we'll do here is just pinch the dough together and smooth it out. And this is one of the great things about this dough. It just eases right back into itself. It's like there was no break. Now then, make sure that hole's plenty big enough. You want that to be about a ½ inch in diameter for both the meat pies and the fruit pies. And of course you can use this recipe for any kind of fruit that catches your eye. I have a little bit of pink sugar here. I've taken some of the cherry juices and mixed it with a little bit of sugar. We're going to sprinkle that on top. It doesn't really give you a whole lot of flavor, but as far as I'm concerned with cherries, every little bit helps. You can't have too much of real cherries. Smooth out that sugar. Try and pack a little bit into that steam hole if you can as well. As that melts, it's going to go right down into your pie and into your cherries. And just tamp it off. And this will go into the oven right beside your meat pie at the exact same temperature with the exact same parchment paper moat, which is actually a little bit more important on this because this juice will go everywhere and it gets messy. And here's our meat pie. It's come out of the oven. We have 195 degrees. Anything above 165 is okay for ground meats. I like mine at 195 just because I like what the meat does when it reaches that temperature. It gelatinizes, it becomes a lot more tender, very, very juicy. We have a nice crunchy crust on here. We're going to pull it up off the parchment paper, and it will stick because the egg wash has made it stick, but that's also what's going to make you nice and crunchy on the bottom. I have some HP sauce on my plate already, and you can see we've got this beautiful GBD going here, the golden brown and delicious, and there's a nice crust on the bottom, and the whole pie holds together. Now we're going to put some gelatin in. This is beef gelatin that we cooked off several weeks ago. It usually lives in the freezer in these little blocks. They're frozen individually and then vacuum sealed. But I've taken one out and I've thawed it and heated it up so it's about the same temperature as our pie. And if you have a syringe or a funnel or a turkey baster, those are fine. What you want to do is get your gelatin inside your steam hole and into your meat. That's going to keep your meats nice and juicy and help them hold on to a lot more moisture. If you're going to take these for lunch, that's always a good thing. We've got a little HP on the top of the pie now, and let's cut inside and take a look. Still nice and hot and steamy, and all that beautiful, beautiful ground beef in there. All that flavor, and the HP sauce just tops it off. If you don't have HP sauce, and that's an English sauce, it's HP brown sauce. If you don't have that, if your local grocery doesn't carry it, most of them do now, you can use your favorite steak sauce. You can also mix that in with your meat before you put it in the pie if you like. Here's our cherry pie out of the oven, and look how good that looks. Just as golden brown and delicious. You notice the crust has a lot of sugar on the top. We're set to go. We have a meat pie for lunch, English meat pie with HP brown sauce, and we have our cherry pie for dessert. Lovely and delicious with sugar and lots of juice. My friends, these are some of the best meat pies and dessert pies you'll ever taste. I love them. I love making them. Try one. I'm Ronnie Stevens, and this is from the Life-Giving Fire. Remember, cooking is a sacred endeavor. Enjoy it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tips, tricks, and recipes. I'm Ronnie Stevens, and this is from the Life-Giving Fire. We'll see you next time.